Okay, thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm very delighted and excited to introduce today's presentation and presenters. As you know, SURGG team has been working very hard, supported by CURF, Center for Undergraduate Research and Fellowships, creating active coating enabled relief tents, which you'll hear about from the team. The SURGG team is a spin-off of a larger program that is NSF funded program on research and education in active coating technologies. And while the faculty and the graduate students on this program, REACT, are working on fundamental problems associated with active coatings, these students have been addressing one of the biggest challenges of implementing these coatings onto real structures. So that's what they're going to talk about. I want to thank several people before I let them speak. So first of all, I'd like to thank CURF and Dr. Ann Vernon-Gray for the support that made us all come together and work on this project. I'd also like to thank my fellow faculty advisors, Les Composto, Zara Fakrai, Olhan Talhan, and most importantly, Kristen Field, who made everything possible. It was also very special because Zara Fakrai and Olhan Talhan got tenure during this period. We'd also like to thank the graduate student mentors. So let's see, Katie Rose, right? Evan Doling, and Sean McGuire. And you have Lexi Zhang and Connor Woods. Okay? And they were really critical participants and contributors to this project. And of course, most importantly, I'd like to thank the students that have contributed. So let me see if I can introduce everybody. So this is Mauricio, Alvarez, Sisan, Dorsu, Kathryn, Khaw, and Griffin Murphy, David Gordon, and we're missing one person, Jane Shmushkis, who was the person responsible for these tent models. So without further ado, I'll let you guys describe your project today.
Great. Thanks so much for that introduction, Dan. And we're really excited to present with you our active coating wedge tent relief tent. So to start, why even consider active coatings and why consider a tent? So over 26.4 million people have been displaced by climate and weather-related disasters between 2008 and 2015. That's a huge amount of people who have been forced out of their homes, and many have turned to live in relief camps, most of which include tents. It's not just environmental disasters that require tents. Political and humanitarian disasters need tents as well. Between 2013 and today, over 2 million Syrian refugees have fled Syria for tent-based relief camps across both Southern Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. What happens with these camps is they're designed to last for 7 years. But on average, they last anywhere between 7 and 17, and there's some isolated cases of that reaching up as high as 40 years. It's a huge problem on how to create a manageable and livable shelter for the many people who are displaced from their homes. So this is an example of one of the ISO camps, which is a provisional camp set up by the United Nations after a disaster. There's many white tents, and there's tons of guidelines on how these tents are produced, manufactured, and their durability. Some things that this camp does well is that they provide shelter to people who previously did not have shelter. It also can increase people's health by providing barriers that prevent the spread of disease. And these tents create privacy for people who otherwise don't have homes. But there's some flaws to this model. These tents are complex to build. There's little space to put them. And finally, they don't present a solution towards water management, which is a huge problem in these tent camps and relief scenarios. In the traditional shelters, which are tents that have been used for thousands of years, they also don't have solutions for water management. On this Jordanian tent, water just rolls right off the fly. This fly, which is traditional as a covering for shade, has a giant hole in the middle where water would just fall through. And the teepee, while nice, directs water in a bunch of different ways and can only be set up on flat ground, but it also requires the long poles for you to get anywhere in your tent assembly. So we decided to take a look at water retention as our main focus and see how active coatings can be incorporated. While in the research phase, we Skyped with ShelterBox, which is a leading tent engineer that supplies disaster relief tents, and they told us that just 53% of tent camps meet the standards for water access. That means 47% of people living in a tent-based environment do not have access to proper water, which is essential to live a healthy life. So we decided as a team to take an approach where we look at active coatings as they relate to the tent. We split our team into 3 groups: the coating group of Kathryn and Griffin, which looked at how these coatings could be applied to fabric. We had a characterization group of Mauricio and Sisan, and they were testing the coatings using ellipsometry, goniometry, light microscopy, and SEM. And we had the design team of me and James Shmushkis, who couldn't be here today, and we were looking at designing a structure that increases the livability in these disaster scenarios while incorporating the coating. So we started by looking at the ShelterBox tent. ShelterBox loaned us one of their tents that's actually deployed in disaster scenarios, and we set it up within office space in Adams. So this is how the tent setup went. It actually takes a while to set up. It takes about 2 hours on average to set up. And even without instructions, it took a couple students some time to figure it out. But these tents are what are commonly used, and they have a great benefit to the people in these disaster scenarios. So we learned a lot from the ShelterBox tent. On the left, we were able to explore within the tent, and then in the middle, that green box is how the tent was shipped into Adams. It's a 110-pound green box that's filled with all the essentials you may need when you're starting up life in a camp. And inside this green box is a pouch for water filtration. That's this. So water comes in there, it goes down that tube, and there's a filter right in there. But we are curious if we could integrate a water management solution into this tent itself based off the active coatings. And then here we all are looking happy after we assembled the tent. So that led us to this scenario, where say we have a bunch of tents in a field or on a hillside. What happens when it rains? So now it's raining, and the question is, and the question is, how does the water interact with the environment and with the tent itself? So we started by thinking about the general form of the tent. Water will land on the tent, and gravity can propel it downwards. But could we use coatings to channel it to collect at a single point, when we could then filter it much more easily and solve the problem of water management? So that's what we were looking at with these arrows. Here's the general form of the tent, and we were interested in trying to see if we could get water to collect in the 2 corners on either side. So we set out to achieve 4 different factors in the tent design. We wanted a tent that was easy to deploy and assemble. We wanted a tent that was modular and customizable, so it could be rearranged depending on whatever disaster scenario you might be in. We wanted the tent to be ventilated and comfortable, so it would be a pleasant living experience to the extent possible. And finally, we wanted the tent to collect and channel water. So that was where we saw a good use for the active coating technology, because we could use hydrophobic coatings to potentially channel water. So that led us to the overall purpose for the summer, which was to design a rapidly deployable relief tent and develop the active coatings that allow the tent to interact with the environment, and that would enable water collection and potentially filtration. So now I'm going to turn over to Griffin to introduce superhydrophobicity.
Great, thanks. So when we talk about collecting water in our tent, it's very important that we start thinking about being able to divert the water, and that the surface would be able to repel the water so the water can go where we want it to go. So we immediately look to one classic example of this, which is the lotus leaf. It's commonly found in nature, and it is superhydrophobic, meaning that it repels water. Water raindrops, when it comes in contact with the lotus leaf, immediately beads up and can begin rolling at almost no angle. It's a very slippery surface for the water. So we thought if we could have a surface where the water beads up and it's also slippery, that would be ideal for our tent. So when we talk about how water beads up on the surface, we're talking about the hydrophobicity. And this was measured through a thing called contact angle. So to measure the contact angle, you take a drop of water, place it on the surface, and measure the angle between the droplet and the surface itself. And this angle tells you how hydrophilic or hydrophobic the surface is. So for instance, For a contact angle of less than 90, the surface is hydrophilic, meaning that the surface likes water and it isn't good for our needs. For a contact angle greater than 90, it means the surface is hydrophobic or repels the water. But what we really wanted to achieve was a superhydrophobic surface with a contact angle greater than 150 degrees. So that was one of our goals with our surface. However, just because you have a contact angle greater than 150 degrees does not necessarily mean that it will work for our situation. It's possible for instance, with a rose petal to have a contact angle that seems to be superhydrophobic, but the surface is sticky. We wanted a slippery surface like the lotus leaf. So we measured this through a thing called contact angle hysteresis. To measure hysteresis, one way to look at it is to take a drop of water at an angled surface and measure the contact angle on the advancing side and the contact angle on the receding side and take the difference between those two numbers. And the contact angle hysteresis, this difference that you get, is a very good indicator of how sticky or slippery it will be. So for a slippery surface, it will have a very low hysteresis, and for a more sticky surface, it will have a higher hysteresis. So knowing that we wanted to have a surface that makes water beat up and is also slippery, we began looking at how to achieve this. We found out that it takes the right combination of surface chemistry and also surface roughness. With chemistry alone, you can take a flat surface and make it hydrophobic. However, to achieve superhydrophobicity, you need a certain level of surface roughness. Roughness can enhance hydrophobicity of the surface in two different ways. One is the Wenzel state, where the roughness of the surface enhances the hydrophobicity simply by the water being in contact with a greater surface area due to the roughness. So if the surface was hydrophobic when flat, now that it's rough, it will be more hydrophobic. Another scenario is the Cassie-Baxter state, which is usually considered more hydrophobic. In the Cassie-Baxter state, air pockets are trapped underneath the water due to the arrangement of the surface structures. And water is defined as having a contact angle of 180 degrees with air. So the more air you can have trapped under the water droplet, the more hydrophobic the surface will be. So we started looking for how to achieve something in that state. We also found out that to achieve a superhydrophobic surface, you not only need micron-sized structures or nanostructures, but you need a combination of both of them for a hierarchical roughness. This is what the lotus leaf is able to do, where you can see it has the micron-sized structures, but also the nanostructures on top of each little mound. And that allows it to have as hydrophobic a surface as possible. So this is what we're trying to achieve with our coating. I'm going to pass it over to Kathryn, and we'll talk about the actual coating.
Great, thanks, Griffin. So since superhydrophobic coatings can divert water for water collection, that was our goal. We essentially wanted to kind of make it look like this SEM image in which we have appropriate roughness and also have appropriate surface chemistry so that our coatings have a high enough contact angle and a low hysteresis. So some challenges and some concerns that we did take into account while starting is the scalability. As you can see, the tent over there is going to be on a much larger scale if we did do this as commercial use. So you have to also think about how easy is it to manufacture. Furthermore, since many superhydrophobic coatings as of now use fluoropolymers, we have to also consider the environment, especially since these will be used by humans, which we don't actually want to use. Furthermore, we also have to think about adhesion in this case because they will be exposed to elements, as David mentioned, and we need to make sure these coatings are in fact durable. So considering this, we chose spray coating as our method of delivering these coatings. This is due to the benefits. It's not only scalable, rapid, but it's also surface topography independent, thus allowing us to essentially deposit our coatings onto whatever we want. So as you can see in this, the method is just put the solution in that area. We feed air into this tube over here. This atomizes the solution and allows us to essentially run our substrate underneath and thus coat it. Some difficulties that we did encounter is that we used a water-based salt dispersion, so we had to evaporate water since it doesn't actually evaporate immediately, which causes a coffee ring effect. So in order to overcome this, we simply heated the substrate. Now, in conjunction with our characterization and design team, we chose the substrate in question to be polyethylene terephthalate, also known as PET. This is because at the denier that we chose, which is just how woven the fabric is, the water doesn't actually soak through, which is something you want in a tent, naturally. Furthermore, it's durable, lightweight, and because it's inexpensive, it's also used commonly in academia and commercial practices. Furthermore, its melting point is pretty high, which allows us to use the heat gun on it without any problems. In addition, because of this benzene ring, it's also hydrophobic to begin with, something that we obviously want as a tent. Now for our actual spray, we chose graphene nanoplatelets. This is due to the fact that they are water dispersible, which is something that we did want in order to make it friendly for the environment. Furthermore, it's just a lot of carbon atoms, which is hydrophobic in nature because they do not have polar bonds. Furthermore, since these are platelets, when we actually disperse it using the graphene spray coating, it automatically has roughness. We actually found this in a paper that suggested it to us, and we then built upon that and found that 15 coats was the appropriate thing to deposit on the platelets. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over what these actually look like to Sisan.
Okay, so with the help of some of our graduate student mentors, Evan and Katie, we were able to obtain some SEM images of our samples. And so on the left, you see an image of the bare fabric, uncoated, and on the right, you see the fabric with 15 coats of the graphene nanoplatelets on the top of it. So you can clearly see there's a weaving pattern of the threads in the uncoated PET fabric. And so when we deposit the nanoplatelets onto the fabric, the patterning of the threads help to create this microscale roughness. And so you can clearly see that there are like the hills of the weaving create this microscale roughness. And also, when you take a closer look, because the platelets are flat when they are deposited, they form a random patterning, which helps us create this nanoscale roughness. And so we can see that with the contact angles of the coated and uncoated fabrics, our graphene particles did help us reach that superhydrophobic level by increasing the contact angle from 145 to 153. And also the sliding angles between the two coatings, the one with the fabric with the coating was much lower than the uncoated fabric, which allows our tent to be even more slippery and for our water droplets to just roll right off. And so although we were able to achieve this superhydrophobic characteristic of our coating on our tent, we did run into problems with adhesion of the coating to the actual surface of the fabric. And so we ran a series of tests to mimic possible scenarios that the tent might encounter in real life. So with these two images, you see this is an image of just the uncoated fabric. And these are all microscopic images, by the way. And this is just the 15 coats of graphene. And so the first test we ran was rubbing a nitrile glove onto the coated fabric 15 times. And so this was to mimic when if someone was assembling the tent, just bare hand interaction with the actual coating. We did a self-friction test, and so the way our tent actually works is it collapses and opens up, and so it's possible that when the tent is collapsed and opened, both sides of the coated layers will actually touch each other, causing some of the coating to come off. We also ran the coating under a water stream for 30 seconds, and so you can see some of the coating was removed. And lastly, we really wanted to test, how durable is this coating. So we used adhesive tape and sonication, and you can see that in this image, most of the fibers of the fabric end up being exposed in comparison to the other tests. And so now I'm going to hand it over back to Griffin to see how we tackle that problem of adhesion.
Okay, so when the characterization team got back to us and said that the coating had the superhydrophobic properties, but it was not that durable and it lost these after some basic durability tests, we sort of went back to the drawing board and started thinking about what sort of adhesive layers could we add to make the coating more durable. So we started trying out different sorts of epoxies and adhesives. We found out that using a commercially available rubber cement as a base layer greatly improved the durability. So for the final coating, we wound up doing the uncoated fabric, then a layer of the rubber cement. Then it was briefly heated with a heat gun before applying the graphene spray coat. That was just to get a nice even coat across the whole substrate, and then heated with a heat gun again to evaporate any of the water that was still on top. And that process was repeated 15 times to have a thick coat, make sure the entire thing was coated. And then afterwards, it was put in an oven at 80 degrees Celsius for an hour to make sure that all of the water was evaporated and might have been missed by the heat gun. So I'm going to give it back to Mauricio to talk about the more durable coating.
So this small step, or actually putting the cement before we put the graphene, dramatically increases how durable coating was. So here we can see how the water actually is bouncing off a sample which was already being brought, just showing us how it maintains properties. We also see here an image of just a little fabric sample dropped, and we can see that although it loses some of the coloring, it still maintains all the properties of being super hydrophobic and very slippery. But how much did it change, or how much better it is, it's something that we can say a lot, but let me talk about numbers now. Here we have the uncoated fabric, which has a contact angle of around 145. And we can see that both the graphene and the cement with the graphene increase this contact angle. So it does make them more hydrophobic. But once they're rubbed, the graphene by itself is almost the same as the uncoated fabric. However, the cement and the graphene, even after being rubbed, it maintains a super hydrophobic character. Again, as Griffin mentioned, we don't want it to be only super hydrophobic, we want it to be slippery. So we did the same type of comparison. We can see that the uncoated fabric gives us an angle hysteresis of 21, and this translates to a sliding angle of 90 degrees, or more than 90 degrees, which is not what we want. Now, the graphene and the cement with graphene, in their pristine conditions, give us a sliding angle of under 10 degrees. So this is almost flat, and the water will just bounce off. But without the cement, so the graphene rub comes back to a very high sliding angle and a very high hysteresis, while the cement with the graphene rub, it does lose some of this low hysteresis, but it maintains enough to still be a significantly low sliding angle. Here we can see why the graphene by itself lost its properties, both the slippery nature and the super hydrophobic nature. Here we can see how we can see the roughness. There's bigger features, smaller features, and once it was rubbed, it gets pretty much flattened out. And this messes up with the whole theory that we talked about creating those nano and micro surfaces to allow us for this super hydrophobic state. Also, it's possible that some of the fabric might have gotten exposed, and this will just make it more similar to the fabric than the actual coated samples. Lastly, it's good that looking to the future, just as important as it is to look into new coats or new materials to coat with, it's very important to look for ways of stabilizing these coats. Because just as we saw, the graphene worked, but all we needed was something to make the graphene stay and keep it functional. And if we're going to use this for relief situations, we want to have a process that is optimized for quick deployment and production. And thus, the current process right now will be too time-consuming for that. So this is something also we want to work on for future situations. David, you want to wrap it up?
Sure. Thanks, Mauricio. So now that we've discussed a bit about the coatings and how we use graphene nanoplatelets to achieve hydrophobicity and superhydrophobicity, let's think for a minute about how we can apply that back to the tent. So we started out this presentation by identifying a set of 4 factors, and then we started by explaining how the active coating technology could start influencing the properties of water on the material. So let's all tie it all back together. So to start, we brought up this imaginary landscape filled with a couple of tents. But our essential question was, how can these tents utilize water collection and filtration as a property of the material within the tent to help the humans in their environment? So we started by thinking about how these tents are even assembled. They can't magically arrive in that fantasy landscape. So we envisioned that since all these poles are in the plane, there's a joint on each corner. And the joint would look something like this. And what that would do is enable the tent to seamlessly fold and unfold and be rapidly deployable. So there would only be one way to set up the tent, and rather than a camping tent where you would have to weave the poles into the fabric, guess which pole is which, there's only two types of poles in this design. And it's very easy to set up because all you do is fold it up and then it'll click. And then when it folds down, like in the graphic on the right, it folds so it's completely flat and could then be packed quite easily. We also thought about how these tents could be arranged. So in plan, the front of this tent has a 120-degree angle. So that enables us to have 3 tents arranged and circumscribed within a circle for modular reasons. So they could be arranged with space between them if you want 3 separate tents, or they could be arranged where there's no space between them and the front flaps could be rolled up. So you effectively have one large tent. And there's also a couple of different paradigms beyond the circular geometry. We also thought back to the original humanitarian standards published both by UNESCO and the Sphere Handbook, which are actually used in these relief tent deployment scenarios. So to start, our tent does have a 14-meter square area, which is the minimum required for a 4-person tent. It is adaptable to many uses because it's modular and can be rearranged in many different ways. Our coatings do not allow water to leak through their coating, which is one of the standards. And another one of their standards is headroom. You want to be able to stand up within the tent. So at least 33% of the floor area must be above 1.8 meters. So on our tent, this is the total area, and that area above 1.8 meters is shaded in slightly darker gray. So when we compare that to the ShelterBox tent, which is the industry standard, they did an excellent job. And approximately 30%, slightly over 30% of their area is above that standard, which is excellent. But what we were able to do on our tent was use catenary curves, which is a geometry that poles adopt in tension and make the curves such that they can be taller. So that enables us to have 60% of the area above the 1.8 meter height, almost doubling that standard. We also were thinking about the ventilation of the tent, which is important both for thermal reasons as well as for flammability reasons. So we envision that air can move through and out through the door, or through and out through vents. So there's vents on the front panels, the middle top panel, and the rear panel that could also operate as doors if necessary. And each of the vents have a mesh coating below them, so you can open the vent without leaving the tent completely open to the elements, insects, and whatever else might be around. We also finally incorporated the coating back into the tent design. So on these images, the light blue at the edges are the regions that are coated. And this coating, we should also mention, does not rely on fluorinated chemistry and is largely safe to interact with. So here, the coatings are along the edges there, and there on each of the 3 tents. And we can also modify whether the vents are open or closed depending on the environment. So when we look at these coatings a little deeper in a cross section, the scheme works as follows. A piece of fabric, the red piece, is tucked in under. This dash line indicates sewing, and the black indicates the PET, which is 110 deniers. And denier is just is a measurement of fabric weave thickness or weave density. And this blue region is what's coated. So as water goes down the tent, like following these blue lines based off the direction from the coating, water can drop down and hit the coating, and then it would just propagate down the tent into an area where it could be collected. So the coating would enable the water runoff to fall down the tent. The water runoff could then be collected by a series of filters. Here was a quick schematic of filters of decreasing pore size, which are membrane-based filters, and then they collect in a collection vat. And there's already third-party existing technologies that can be used to purify water in these disaster scenarios, such as Life Straw, iodine was used at some point, chlorine was used at some point, but LifeStraw is now one of the leading technologies that's used. There's also the filtration technology that ShelterBox demoed in their green box. And then to wrap up everything, we started by looking at graphene nanoplatelet coatings. Graphene nanoplatelets were spray coated to the surface of 110 denier polyethylene PET, and then we saw how the wettability changed based off both the chemistry and surface roughness. We went a little further and characterized the surface roughness and chemistry, and we used light microscopy, SEM, and goniometry as indicators. And finally, we incorporated the coating back to redirect water while also optimizing livability and some of the social factors that we can consider within a tent. So overall, we were looking at a tent design, and then we introduced active coatings to try to improve how the tents interact with the environment. We have a lot of people that we would like to thank. We'd like to thank Dan Lee, the grant PI, Orkan Talan, Russell Composto, and Zara Farkai, and Kristen Fields, who are also co-PIs on this project, as well as Katie Rose, Sean McGuire, Evan Belling, Connor Woods, and Lexi Sang, who are our graduate student mentors. And we also have a little gift for each of the PIs. We got each of them a little tent that they can pick up after this. And also we have a couple of models to show on here, and there's a tent wireframe model in the back. And thank you very much for listening, and we'd love to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you for the great presentation. Now floor is open for questions and comments. All right, Leah?
Really nice design, guys. It's really cool. I was wondering, how are you going to deploy the actual tent? Will it be incorporated into the ShelterBox, or do you have another plan for that?
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of different ways of deploying the tents. So there's tents that are already deployed and ready to be used in certain scenarios. So for instance, that would be a region like the Philippines that gets hurricanes all the time. So they know predictably, well, not predictably, but with a certain frequency, there's a natural disaster. So they can predict and put the tents there already. That's the best case scenario, because then you already have the tents there. So when an unfortunate event like a hurricane or something happens, the tents are there ready to go. But in the ShelterBox tent, yeah, so one thing we're envisioning is the tents could be shipped in some sort of a rapidly deployable format. One of the perks of the ShelterBox is that it's already in the shipping container. And actually when we were Skyping with the engineers, they were talking about how people have used ShelterBoxes, literally the green boxes themselves, for all kinds of creative purposes. So that's something we are considering, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted the tent to fold flat and be easy to deploy, because often in these disaster scenarios, people have nothing, and we're trying to get it so that they can get there and be assembled without instructions or education or training on how to assemble the tent, because it might be hard enough just to ship the tents to where they have to go.
Other questions?
So if you were handing this project off to the next generation of students that happen to be sort of like her, for example, what would be your recommendations concerning where to go forward in terms of the materials and the design aspects? Maybe start with the materials. There's adhesion issues clearly, but what would you suggest for the next generation of students?
For improving upon sort of the coatings that we've been working with, adhesion is definitely the number one sort of issue with what we were able to produce. But if they decided to look for a different coating, maybe suggest looking into see-through coatings. Because for ours, as is black, so which works for our seam design. However, we would not be able to coat the entire tent just due to heat concerns. So if they could somehow come up with a see-through coating, then you could possibly cover the entire tent.
Any design aspect,
Right.
or any improvements that might be thought of?
So for the design aspect, one thing we were considering but ran out of time on was actual hinge design. Because one thing we wanted was something that could compress fully so it's flat and then deploy fully so it snaps into place. And we were also considering how we could get the tent to go in states in between that. Maybe if you want a partial tent for just shade covering on a sunny day or something like that. We actually talked to people in the mechanical engineering department about how we could get such a joint to work. But in the end, we were pressed for time and wanted to make sure the tent design was finished.
Great. Any other questions? All right, if not, as David mentioned, we have models here. You can come up and see. If you want to touch, ask them. If you want to be touched. But otherwise, let's thank the team one more time for their great.